This afternoon, we're going to try and have a look at this thing called beyond compliance and what that might mean. So many times I hear mining companies talk about, well, we don't want to talk about compliance. That's old hat. We're beyond compliance. We're this thing called best practice. But what does that actually mean? And is it more than a state of mind? I rather like this slide up here. I'm going through a lighthouse stage. These things were built by engineers in the 19th century, and this one's off France. Does anyone notice anything happening to that lighthouse? Anything unusual about it? Is someone going to say there's water?
It's getting wet.
It's getting wet, that's right. And by the way, there are prizes at the end of this presentation for those that speak the most, and harmful yet painful electric shocks for those that don't say anything. So jump on. I'm going to have a go at changing it. These are the questions that I'd really like us to think about this afternoon, because if we're contemplating what does it mean to be beyond compliance, what are the questions that we're actually asking ourselves? Oh, and by the way, what's happening in that photograph? Anything unusual? I got some laughter from here. What's happening? Who's going to tell me? Have we got a roaming mic somewhere? He's about to get blown up. When I first saw this, I thought, this is worrying. And then I reflected on it and I thought, this is a really good, this guy's being trained. And this is the trainer assessor who's just got his Cert 4. And that's a really good sort of assessment tool. I don't know what the evidence would look like. Hopefully there will be some. But the real issues we've got to ask on site are really these. Are events random? If events are random, how do we control them? And what's the point of doing legislation? Well, what is legislation anyway? How many pieces of legislation do you have governing mining in New South Wales? 2? 4? Righto, let's just take the Mining Act of 2002. I think you're going to tell us that there's going to be another one later this afternoon. Hands up, everyone who has heard of the mining safety legislation of 2002. Hands up. Beautiful. Look at that. Go on, keep them up, keep them up. Who's actually held a copy in their hand? Keep your hand up if you have. Who's had a little browse through the legislation? You don't count, you wrote it. Who's had a little browse? Who now has read it from cover to cover? And who is ready, Rob, thank you, to answer questions? Now, why has no one read the legislation? And we're talking about compliance. How can you be compliant if you haven't even read the rules for which you're going to be compliant and tested against? Just a little question to take home. Is human behaviour random? Where's a girl? Do you have any doubts that male behaviour is random? It's pretty true, isn't it?
This is a bad audience.
This is a bad audience. What, from the female perspective? Okay. And what about engineering design? Are we getting some certainty in numbers? Right? How many engineers have we got here? Hands up. Right, I lost faith in all of you lot when you told me that there was an infinite number of infinities, all of different sizes. How can that be? And parallel lines meet an infinity. That's got to be rubbish, hasn't it? And lastly, what about safety system design? Is that random, or is it meant to have some sort of coordination, some sort of system to it? What does everyone think? Hands up if it's random. Hands up if it's systematic. For me, I suspect, from what I see, it's random. There are paper systems out there that are beautiful, unless you're a tree. The only problem is that it's got absolutely nothing to do with what actually happens down the pit. Why would that be? Because people are supposed to do their work under the rules set out in the safety system. And what is a safety system? How should we think about it? Maybe these will give us an answer. These slides you've probably already seen, but I really like them because this expresses my life perfectly. Everyone see what's happening here? We've had a car go in. There's a nice little truck pulling it out. Oh dear. So far so good. But then we have got another problem, haven't we? We try and solve that problem? Let's do that. So we get a big one. And look, we pulled a nice little car out, and that's a good thing. Up it comes. We happy? Beautiful job. Have we done our take 5? Have we done our rack? Oh, and by the way, even though bow tie analysis is the latest thing, I like the racks because you'd only do the work, wouldn't you, if your number came out as 11. Right? 11 is a beautiful number. It's a prime number, isn't it? It's also a palindrome. No matter how you look at it, it's a double one. If it's more than 11, it's too risky, isn't it? So you wouldn't do the job. And if it's below 11, 1 to 10, it just means the supervisors have sat on the guys to get the numbers down. And how do you multiply and subtract these numbers on the 5 by 5? And last question, what is the quantitative difference between 11 and 12 in terms of risk? It's a very, very good way of ranking risks or hazards or whatever you want to call them on site. Absolutely dreadful in determining what is an acceptable level of risk. And we're not even going near that other nice little juicy one of what is reasonably practicable. There's a scorpion sting in the concept in the legislation around how do you understand reasonably practicable. Oh dear. And here are the questions. Is anyone surprised? Does this just speak about what life at work is all about? What went wrong? Nothing.
It was set up.
It was set up.
Particularly for the internet.
Particularly for the internet. Was the adverse event foreseeable? Because this really is when we begin to drill down into this thing called beyond compliance. You've got to comply with the law, otherwise Rob would get very cross. But if you think about it logically, all the legislation is simply a community opinion about how to manage risk. And it comes from the history. There's a reason why coal mines underground have to have 2 shafts, a secondary egress. And that's because of the New Hartley pit in England that killed, where over 240 people died, and there was only 1 shaft. But that's another story. The key that I see time and time again is the mischaracterisation of risk. In so many fatalities, I've got my usual suspects, and that's nearly always one. They've misunderstood the risk that they were trying to manage. And when you see risk assessments that note as hazards the deputy and the safety and health management system without controls, do you think you've found out something about how those people were really using the system? Were they competent? I don't think so. That's the life that we actually have on a day-to-day basis on site. So what does it mean to be beyond compliant? What we do know is we can sort of think about risk as assessment, management and communication. The only problem is, how do we ever communicate with another person and actually have some certainty that their understanding is the same as ours? As a male, we all know the rules. Wifey gets flowers on her birthday, anniversaries, and oh look, women, please, can you just not listen to this because this is secret men's business. Anniversaries and birthdays, that's it. No more flowers any other time. Well, I broke the rule. Up in Brisbane, they've got markets and lovely flowers. Karen loves orientals, so I was feeling a bit romantic one day and I bought her flowers. That's okay, that was random. Then the next week, and I got a kiss on the cheek and a lovely dinner and all the rest of it, so that was good. The next week, I fell into the trap. I broke the rule. I bought flowers again. Took them home, I got the same reaction, you know. This is carrots and all that sort of stuff. She liked the flowers and made sure that I knew that she liked the flowers. The third week, trying to ensure that I didn't create a pattern, I didn't buy flowers. I got home, you know what was said to me, don't you? If you loved me, you would have bought me flowers. And I've been stuffed ever since. Every Wednesday I've got to buy flowers. So we need to be thinking about how we communicate risk. As much as we are putting so much time and effort into this other stuff about assessing it. And what are we assessing? What is risk? Why are we hung up on concepts of frequency and consequence, or probability and consequence? Because one of the difficulties, as soon as you start having probabilities, is how do you deal with independent events? And each shift is an independent event. And the probabilities of something go wrong just reset. And we had one particular case in Queensland which was just a perfect example. People were acting on their experience based on past probabilities of how the job should end up. The problem was that it didn't turn out as expected, and a man died. Risk is the chance of an error causing you harm, where chance is an undesigned or fortuitous occurrence or cause. It's a different way of thinking about risk, and it's different to how it's usually set out in the legislation. But think about it. That's normally what bites us. And if you talk to the inspectors, how many times will you hear them say, the guys just didn't plan for this. This was not what they were expecting. This happened by chance, and that's their view. Now, the inspectors may or may not agree with that, but often that is the emotional response that a lot of the guys have when there's been an adverse incident. In France, what's interesting there is that they include vulnerability, because their definition of risk looks at it very much from the community perspective. And why vulnerability? If you put a dam near a town and the dam wall breaks, what happens to the town? So they want people to actually be thinking about vulnerability. I wonder if we're thinking about electricity, whether we should include vulnerability. And who would be the people that would be most vulnerable? Non-electricians, because they wouldn't know about electrons, would they? How do you manage and avoid a hazard if you don't know the hazard exists? Isn't that the electrical problem? Where's Lionel? He was telling me that at lunchtime. Where's he hidden? He's got a new book coming out. Lionel.
Right in front of you.
There he is. He's got a new book coming out. And that's what we're talking about. And he said one of the greatest problems I've got on sites is getting non-electrical people to understand that there's a great big bitey out there and they don't even know about it. You know, the other thing that Bernard, where's Bernard hiding away? He's concerned about water and people getting electrocuted because they're using power tools near water. I don't have a problem with that. What's wrong with water and power tools? I just ask this. When we've got an electrocution, we like, please, in the coroner's court, to have clear entry burns and clear exit burns. If they're lying in too much water, then we don't get the nice exit burns, and then we spend 2 days arguing about whether or not they were electrocuted. That's a terrible thing that I've just said, but I've said it to ram home a point, and that is water and electricity doesn't mix. And we know that. And yet, why am I hearing from the inspectorate that it's a big issue? I can't believe this. This is bizarre. What have you got in place? If an inspector or someone else came out, some dreadful piece of work like me, and said, well, show me how you're separating electricity, people and water. What are you going to show me? And when you show it to me, would you feel comfortable as the experts that you've really gone beyond compliance? This has actually happened. Some people say that it was a mistake. I happen to know that it was modern art and they're doing a building up, and this wee little forklift thingy is going to hang out of the window as a piece of modern art. Risk is the effect of uncertainty on an organisation's objectives. That's the latest standard. Well, I can reduce risk now to zero. Like that. Just take it out of the organisation's objectives. The Australian standard, I think, has lost its way if that's how we're thinking about safety. And of course, this is for the engineers. This is one of the earliest definitions. It's a mathematical definition and it appeared in the journal Risk Analysis in about 1984. The only problem is, what's the relevance of that definition in your workplace? Because the really, really hard question is, why do we have safety systems? What's the purpose of a safety system? Who's going to tell me? Have you all got one at site? Hands up who doesn't have a safety system. Right, well, you've all got one. Who's going to tell me? What's the purpose of a safety system? No? What's the purpose of... Oh, no, I'm not going to ask you. You'll know the answer. See, lawyers are evil. You can tell they wear coats.
Prevent injury and harm.
Prevent injury and harm. Who agrees with that? What's the focus? If it's to prevent injury and harm, what are we looking at? Humans, aren't we? Humans. Well, how does our system understand the human condition? Huh? What does it mean to have a system that is individual, person-focused, that will keep them safe? What does that mean? From an operator's point of view, something bad or really nasty could happen, and if it does, no one will thank you. That's the operator's definition of risk. It's not up in the clouds. Oh, and take fives. Very supportive, beautiful, gets people to stop. And when was the last time you saw a take five that said, well, you know, this friggin' drive, it's too narrow for the continuous miner. So we'll stop, we'll retreat, and we'll redo the mine plan. Anyone ever seen a take five like that? No. What do you get? Be situationally aware. What does situationally aware mean? For God's sake. What does that mean? And how are you supposed to do it for 12 straight hours? It's not going to happen. This is from Jim Joy, and I talked to him at play lunch, and he said it was all right. These were a couple of slides that he put into a presentation for quarries, and in Queensland, quarries are the problem children. It's where all of our major incidents and fatalities are occurring. What I like about it is no longer are we asking simply the question, is the safety and health management system effective? Because if you sit the CEOs down and say, paint me a picture of an effective safety and health management system, they can't. And if you can't paint a picture, how's anyone going to build it? Maybe what we can tackle though is control effectiveness. Because if we've got a situation that's an unacceptable risk, and we say, well, we'll put in place a control, and with that control in place, it's now acceptable, what happens if the control fails? Who's going to tell me? Where are we? Back to where we started? Unacceptable risk. The other thing is, when we look at the Swiss cheese, can I ask you to remember this? The holes aren't stationary. The friggin' holes constantly move. So just because a control might contemplate a particular scenario, what happens if the scenario changes? The piece of cheese changes its shape. The holes change. Do you then still have an effective control? The issues, I think, for beyond compliance is really a state of mind. And we'll have a look at a couple of slides in a moment that just develop that theme. But really, what are we asking in a safety system? What are we asking our guys at the floor to actually do? And what are we asking our CEOs to do? And I'd like to suggest we're asking them simply to answer these questions. What can go wrong? How can it happen? What are the consequences? How likely is it to happen? What can we do about it? And lastly, how can we check that what we're doing is actually effective? And that last evaluation question or loop is usually missing. It's quite remarkable. We don't evaluate. We put in place controls and then walk away. And I think a couple of the speakers before lunch said that. Why do we do that? Because we started the day with a comment from Einstein, which is if you're doing the same things with the same people expecting a different result, you're an idiot. Well, how do we know that what we're doing is actually effective? We all know this. The purpose of risk management is to achieve an acceptable level of risk. But how do we develop effective controls? That's the question I'd like you to really think about. Legislative compliance is really the basic step. With a bit of luck and a fair breeze, what the Act and the regs do is they give you not just a community standard, but a way of dealing in a decision-making context with the risk you're trying to manage. But what would it mean to go further than what the bare regs say? And lastly, when we look at all incidents, we're always looking at failure of defences. Yeah? It's one of the biggest things. What was the absent defence? What was the failed defence? And nearly always that comes back to how we've categorised risk and how we've thought about the controls. I've just finished a fatality in a Queensland metals mine, and it's just the usual suspects. That was a fall into a stope, right? Now, a fall into a stope, as everyone who's involved in metal mining knows, is a principal hazard. That and roof fall. They're the things that really knock over metal miners. And the way they characterise risk in their risk register really talked about people falling from scaffolding. So before they even started, right up in the higher elements of the safety system, they'd mischaracterised, misdiagnosed, and everything else that flowed from that risk register was wrong. The coal equivalent would be seeing gas in the Gulf as a failure of containment, or gas in the mine, or gas coming out of the seam as a failure of containment. Would that be a good categorisation? Don't all speak at once. I'll move on. Jim Joy has talked about this, and it's really quite critical, because one of the things that we're beginning to look at more and more, which I'm very approving of, frankly, is how do we recover if the control has failed? So it's actually looking at both sides. If you're running a wash plant, fall from height is always a possibility. Do you have things on site near the wash plant that can actually do something to assist a person once they're injured? Or alternatively, lessen the consequence of the adverse event. What would have stopped this from happening? Who's going to tell me? High bridge? Yep. It's a nice story, isn't it? Is it human error? Come on. Hey, we always find the human, don't we? There's got to be a human. Well, it was his fault. That's beautiful because it protects our system. We don't have to ask the hard question. Well, how did management make a mistake? How did the safety system allow this to happen? We've got a bad egg. If we get rid of the driver, that won't happen again, will it? Am I right? Beautiful. Who said no? Yeah, you got a prize. Right? Rob, this man down here gets a prize. So how would we fix this to make sure it didn't happen again?
Putting the system in place so that it can't.
We start...
You know, with that, it's obviously he didn't know the height of his load. And
Yes.
he's gone through a bridge that was lower.
Yep.
If we plan the route that we're going to drive and we know what bridges are on that route with heavy haulage, you wouldn't drive down that road.
Yes, or there's some other way where you know that all bridges are at least 3 metres, so you make sure the load can't go above. So we're looking at some sort of engineering control along with just simple good planning. From a female perspective, can males plan?
I'm not going to comment.
Not going to comment. My firm view is that women were put on this earth to manage males. I don't want to steal the thunder of my friend who's going to be talking about the legislation, but realistically, what Rob and the Inspectorate and the regulators, New South Wales, Queensland and everyone else is trying to do is we've got a developing community standard or set of standards that have developed over time. And we try and prevent adverse incidents, but there's also workers' compensation and there's also rehabilitation. So we're trying to move further and further into a statutory scheme that is person-focused and promotes productivity and not having illnesses in the workplace or accidents in the workplace. So we can think of the legislation very much as a community standard, and the community, as we know, will hold people accountable to the standard. Equally though, we can think of the legislation and we can think of statutory positions, we can think of the Advisory Council and these other organisations as being part of the safety structures of the industry, and it's quite important that everyone works together. Time brings change. That, of course, is the Sydney Harbour Bridge. That was built when? Does anyone know about it? 1930-32. Does anyone notice anything curious on these photographs? Yeah, no opera house, that's right. But look, I'll just show you. Can you see these fellas here? Yeah, they're electrical engineers. You can tell because they're wearing hats. Who've gone up to the top there to make sure that they're putting in the lightning bolts in the right spot. And there's old mate down the hole, as you can see, doing a bit of work. There's not any fall restraint or anything as far as you can see. Just not acceptable any longer. It was though then. Of course, having not read from cover to cover your own legislation, it would be fairly curious if I asked you whether you were aware of all of the pieces of legislation that actually govern health and safety in New South Wales. And that includes some of the Commonwealth ones. It's a huge list. And this again is the community trying to say this safety gig is something that's critical and important. We're getting more and more caught up with ALARA and ALARP. Is there a difference? In New South Wales, it's all about reasonably practicable. But bear this in mind, and I'm sure the speaker later this afternoon will be touching on one at least of these concepts, that reasonably practicable is defined in the legislation. You've basically got to do a risk assessment first, and then after that you can consider cost against the risk and mitigating it. And all of the court cases are going to be about whether or not it was reasonably practicable to take the steps that people said you should have taken. I won't dwell too long on that. What is important though is where does all of this legislation stuff flow from? And curiously, it comes from safety science. And that's a driver, again, for the law of torts, particularly negligence. And negligence is a driver of safety science, but also statutory safety and health legislation. And all of this really can be traced back to two concepts. One is the employer's duty, as it was said in the House of Lords, which is like the High Court of England. In 1937, a safe system of work, the appointment of competent workers, fit-for-purpose equipment and properly maintained equipment. And that's where the history comes in. And you see the wheel on the right? Anyone heard of the Nertney wheel? That's straight out of safety science. And what's the difference between what the Nertney wheel tells us is important about work processes and what we see in Clyde Colin English? And I'd like to suggest there's no difference. And what about the safety legislation? If I was to say to Rob, does your Act and your regulations cover trying to get people to have a safe system of work? You would say, yes. What about the appointment of competent people? Yes. Fit for purpose equipment and properly maintained? Yes. And lastly, which doesn't quite come on this slide, proper supervision. The key, in my view, to keeping people safe is the quality and the competency of your supervisors. Frontline. The difficulty that we've got though is, as engineers, if we're trying to understand a problem, what do? We go in and down. It's Newtonian, because we're not like Mr. Newton, because in his Principia Mathematica, he wrote it just like Euclid's Elements, with the same sort of approach. The difficulty is that whilst that is good for understanding complex machinery, it does not help us understand systems which are complex. And we need to think about things in a different way. So as we move to notions of beyond compliance, we start to need to contemplate, how do we think in systems? And it cooks your noodle. Get a book on systems theory and get the sherry out, because you will need it. I can live with this proposition, A causes B. That's nice, isn't it? Beautiful. What's the difference between A causes B and B follows A? Oh, well, it ain't got no causal connection. But what do you need to take a following statement, B follows A, through to a causal statement of A causes B? What do you need for causation? It's one of the problems when we start contemplating root cause. What's a root cause? That presupposes one commencing domino. And I think that theory came around in the 1930s, and it's blown up because there are usually multiple causes. That's the whole idea of ICAMs, taproots and all of them things. The other thing I suspect about systems is what I've noted in the second part of this slide. The nature, purpose and operation of the whole is always different from and more than the sum of its unassembled collection of parts. For the philosophers in the room, it's a gestalt. It's so totally different. And that adds an element of complexity when we're trying to contemplate how do we keep people safe at work. I'd like to suggest to you that from a systems perspective, that's what you've got. And it's always about faster, better, cheaper. That's what the companies want. That's what the accountants are keen on. And accountants are special people. Love them. To go through life finding beauty in the left-hand column of figures, adding up and equaling the right-hand column, is pretty special. You've got to admit, it's pretty special. What always gets caught is safety, and the boundary is always decreased to the limit. Does anyone see that on their sites? It's that inherent tension, isn't it, between productivity and safety, and cutting corners. And most safety systems, unless there's a lot of energy put into them, will gradually drift into failure. And that's one of my usual suspects. They may have started okay, but 5 years later, they're not worth the paper they're written on. And that then leads us to the bigger problem. And this is about beyond compliance. The organisation that you work for will have operational missions and purpose, and that's up the top there. Safety and health, reputation, legal, consumers, financial, cultural, they are all constraints or restraints on achieving the goal that the organisation was created to do. How am I going for time? 1 minute left. Oh, gee whiz, I'll need 2. Something to think about. We're going to go forward. What I'd like you to think just a little bit about is how do you go down into the iceberg of thinking? Currently we react, and that's where normally legislation sits. How are you going to go about transforming and redesigning your system? I'll just move on a bit. What happened there? There's a hook. There's a big truck. That's a burnt truck. Yeah. Have we got a systems failure there? Of course we can create one, or we can just simply say, oh, well, the guy made a mistake with his hook. When you're thinking about your safety system, look critically at it, because we're always wise in hindsight. After the event, it is very, very easy to see what went wrong, and normally we say things like, the bloody fools, this was so obvious. The true answer is, no, it wasn't. They wouldn't have done it if it was. I've heard a lot this morning talked about standard operating procedures. The difficulty is that they tend not to work. And this is a lovely story of the 4-inch flight, where the work instructions said, with the lower cable on the rocket, after the rocket goes up, cut off the burnt bit and put another plug on. They did that until that plug and that cord was too short. And the way the rocket worked is that the top cord had to go first, then the second cord second. If it went the other way around, it turned the motors off, and that was the end of the thrust. This little punter managed to fly for 4 seconds, 4 foot, and this little cockpit at the top was found 100 metres up the way. And you can say to yourself, how is it that people could be doing this? This is just absolutely ridiculous. I should finish on this slide, but I'm going to talk about this one, and then I'm going to go through to the second last slide, and then I'll stop. So with your indulgence, I'll be 1 minute, maybe 2. What I want to tell you is this. If I'm talking to the guys at the face, I'll simply say, listen, buttercups, see this one here? Natural variability, it will kill you. To engineers, I say, you see this one up here? Knowledge, uncertainty, in both consequence and probability, that will kill others. And that's the big fundamental difference between technical knowledge and being in a supervisory or management role in a workplace, as opposed to being down in the pit doing the actual work. And the movement, which is, there's another example of that. We expect work to come out in a particular way. It's the outliers, those that are a couple of standard deviations out from the mean, just things that weren't expected, that will kill. What would have stopped that from happening? Does anyone notice anything unusual in that photo? Oh, please say you do. It's my favourite photo. It comes with me everywhere. Darth Vader! I'll just take you to that. This is an event that happened very recently in the Surat Basin, and the pictures tell the story. Compliance is how you actually go about strapping these things down. And this is gas and petroleum, and they do, no one was hurt in this, Marso. And they do about, each company would do about 750,000 kilometres a month, dragging bits of pipe all over outback Queensland. The compliant response is to retrain the workforce on proper laying of straps. Going beyond compliance is actually redesigning the cab and the back of the truck so that friction is your friend and you stop the pipes from beginning to move so that this can't happen again. So beyond compliance is about how you might think around solving the problem. This is Bernard's water problem, and again, it's the same question that Jim Joy addressed you on, how do you consider the effectiveness of your controls? I think these slides will be up on the webpage if you want to watch it. And the last slide I'd like to share with you is something that I'm very keen and encourage inspectorates to look at. It actually comes from the model work health and safety legislation of the Commonwealth. I assume that it's going to be introduced or has been introduced in New South Wales. It's certainly been introduced in Queensland. It's an ongoing obligation for accountants and others in management roles to be able to demonstrate due diligence. It's an ongoing obligation such that if an inspector or someone calls and says, how are you doing with due diligence in your workplace? You must be able to prove that you understand the nature of the operations and associated risks and hazards. That's a positive obligation on everyone, including accountants and others who haven't got technical knowledge. Secondly, that you have an understanding of resources and processes, knowledge of work health and safety matters, timely response to incidents, and process for legal compliance. But this is all now beginning to look very much like accountants have to go down the pit on a certain number of hours per week or per month. And if they don't, how are they showing that they're actually exercising due diligence? It's something that really is trying to push accountability for safety up from the operational level into the managerial ranks. But ultimately, the question that you need to go home with is being beyond compliance more than a state of mind? Thank you.